Last week we took a look at FNAF 3's models. This week I want to take a look at FNAF 4's models. And I'm going to refresh you guys real quick on a face, vertex, and an edge. A vertices is the point at which triangles will meet, or these guys right here. An edge is the lines that make up a triangle, so one triangle would have 3 individual edges. And a face, otherwise known as a tri, is just simply what you can imagine it is, the actual face of the triangle. And before this video starts, I just want to say that most of these models come from FNAF VR, as the original models from FNAF 4 were never truly released. So this is as close as it's gonna get without going into fan models this time. I also want to say that I'm just getting over a cold as I'm recording this, so if my voice sounds very different from previous videos, that's why, and I do apologize for that. And to start us off, I think we should obviously take a look at Nightmare Freddy. This model contains 41,950 faces and 63,331 edges. As you can see, these models are a lot more detailed than any of the other previous models from the FNAF games. And though the FNAF VR models might be a little bit lower of a poly count than what actually might have been used in the game, we will never be able to truly know because, like I said before, they were never released. As you can see, there's a lot of wear and tear on these Nightmare animatronics, even though they're not even real, because canonically these are all just illusion tech animatronics. You can even see a lot of the Nightmare endo through the actual fur of the animatronic with all the decay, and you can see here that the eyes are very different from any other animatronic, very mechanical, and show no signs of life. Usually these guys would have a light in the center, but since these ones are just in the model viewer, they won't have the lights going off right now. Both the endo and Freddy's jaw feature very sharp teeth, which you don't see in any animatronic aside from Foxy and Mangle in the series. Like all the other Nightmare animatronics, these hands are very pointed at the tips, almost needle-like, but there is quite a lot of fur on the animatronic's hand, making it pretty fat. However, the arms and the legs do save on a lot of polys, even with all the detail in the deterioration of the animatronic. And as you can see, Freddy's bow remains perfectly untouched and perfectly kept. Now, the only way you'd get Freddy to jump scare you in this game is to get too many Freddles sitting on the bed. And as we take a look at the Freddles animatronic, it looks very cute actually. Even though it's supposed to be terrifying, just taking a look at this bad boy shows how adorable it is. This model contains 26,216 faces and 39,458 edges. You could take a peek through here and actually see the mini endo that's inside this guy. And what's funny about this endo is it actually does have a hole in the nose as if it was a real breathing human skull. It keeps the same sharp teeth, although a little bit duller than Nightmare Freddy's, and also doesn't have a bottom part to the jaw. It's just always fully exposed there, and you can tell just by looking at it that that's not due to decay. Up next, we're gonna go to Bonnie, who has 40,656 faces and 61,635 edges. This model remains very similar to Nightmare Freddy's, keeping those very sharp teeth, retaining the exact same endo frame, and also shows quite a lot of signs of deterioration. If you take a look at the back here, you can also see that the actual spine of this endo phases right through the animatronic's bottom jaw. This is something you definitely never see in the game, but is present in this model. However, you can see quite a lot of the endo torso through his actual chest, due to having a ton of his chest being decayed and missing. And unlike Freddy's hand, he doesn't have nearly as much material on it, showcasing a lot more of the endo fingers, while also retaining those sharp pointed tips. Now, Bonnie also had a separate skin in the game for the Halloween edition, and this model contains 38,186 faces and 57,892 edges, which is just a tad bit less than the previous Nightmare Bonnie. This is mainly due to the missing endo skull in this model and a few extra details missing off the endo. And with its yellow and orange color scheme, it does sort of resemble what Chica's model looks like. Speaking of which, this is Nightmare Chica's model. This model contains 41,072 faces and 62,001 edges. This model is significantly chunkier than the other two, with a much more rotund belly. And the teeth on this animatronic are a little bit more curved inwards than the previous ones. This model also does have 2 different eye colors, which you won't see in any other animatronic today. One white and one red. Even the feathers on Chica's head have little endo bones, which is kind of funny, as I don't think these feathers would really move on their own ever. But it definitely is an interesting little addition that they added to this animatronic. There is a lot less wear on this animatronic as well if you compare it to Freddy and Bonnie's. A lot more of her fur remains intact, and the only thing that shows a huge sign of decay is her Let's Eat bib. And just like Bonnie, this model also does have a Halloween version, which is missing quite a few components to the original endo that Nightmare Chica did have. This model sits at 38,010 faces and 57,358 edges, which is a few less than the actual Nightmare Chica model. And on top of it, this model retains a very similar color scheme to the actual Nightmare Chica's model. The only difference being in the Nightmare Pumpkin and the actual glow of the animatronic's eyes, which we both don't have access to in this model. But we do have access to the Nightmare Cupcake, which is a nice, cute, simple model while also being extremely creepy. This model only contains 8,566 faces and 25,688 edges. The smallest model we'll look at today, and it makes sense as it's supposed to be very simplistic, but it still does have its own jump scare, so I thought it was important that we bring this into the conversation as well. I'm gonna skip over the pumpkin model though because it's not too interesting if I'm being honest with you, and not much really goes on with it. So let's move on to Nightmare Foxy. This model contains 35,160 faces and 53,099 edges. A lot of the fur on the bridge of Foxy's nose has actually decayed, showing a lot of what the endo in this model looks like. Now this endo is obviously very different from the previous ones, as Foxy has a very, very different shape of head than the other animatronics. And like previous games, he retains those sharp teeth, which isn't unusual for Foxy, and also has his leg and feet endos fully exposed by the decay of his costume, just like every other FNAF game. His hook is very detailed, and as you zoom closer and closer, you can see the model just gets more and more fine, while also getting darker as it gets to the tip. Foxy's hand is very similar to Freddy's and Chica's, however has much thinner arms than any of the other animatronics, as well as having a big hole in his stomach exposing a little bit more of the endo that lays inside of him. Up next we have Nightmare Mangle. Now this I believe is a fan model. I couldn't find the actual model for Mangle in FNAF VR, so this is the best we're gonna have to work with, and I think it remains pretty true to what the actual Nightmare Mangle model would look like. This model contains 62,562 faces and 122,955 edges. Now the increased poly count could be attributed to this being a fan model, but I imagine Scott's model remained generally around the same area of polys. However, this model does look like one of the most complex models that Scott had made for Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Both of Mangle's heads in this game have received that nightmare effect, gaining those sharp teeth, empty eyes, and overall scary nature to him. Although he does retain his bright rosy red cheeks from FNAF 2, which is very characteristic of Mangle. He also does have this sharp nightmare hand hidden away in his folds, as you can see here, and definitely showcases a ton of the endo. As you can see, there's a ton of detail in the chest, the arms, the legs, all over Mangle's body. There's a ton of poly work done, and a lot of different detail that went into making this model. Now technically Mangle does have two eyes, but they're both on separate heads. As you can see, each head is missing an eye, while the other eye glows bright orange. And when fully T-posed, this Mangle animatronic might just be the tallest model in this game. If we put Fredbear here for scale, you can see just how large this Mangle model is. Up next we have PlushTrap. This model contains 42,238 faces and 63,559 edges. Just like Freddle, this animatronic also remains very cute and very scary at the same time. There is almost no decay on this model, as you can see, and his hands are some of the cleanest in the game, containing no sharp edges at the fingertips and no decay at all on them. His feet are also very similar to the Freddles models, so it might be that these were recycled off the Freddle model, or vice versa. As you can see in here too, the endo skull looks significantly different from Freddles as well, so we can guess that this endo skull was fully engineered solely for PlushTrap. And as we spin around the model, you can see here that the only place that the body and the head fully connect is at that endo skull. This model remains very simplistic, however does use quite a few polys for what it is. Up next we have Nightmare Balloon Boy. This model contains 16,887 faces and 27,866 edges. Now this model is very interesting, containing some of the creepiest hands that we've seen all game, remaining very human-like with how they're segmented, while also retaining those nightmarish qualities with the very pointed tipped ends to them. They also remain very skinny, which is definitely off-putting and uncanny. As you can see as well, Nightmare Balloon Boy has two separate jaw models, one on the interior and one on the exterior. They're very close to each other, only being different in size. What I believe Scott did is he probably made the bottom jaw model, copied and pasted it, and made it even smaller for the interior model. We also see that BB's head does not connect anywhere to the rest of his body and is just sort of floating all spooky-like. He also has those piercing red eyes, which Balloon Boy has never had in the series before. As you can see here, Balloon Boy does retain his propeller, although it is a different color in this game, being blue, as it's normally red. On top of that, his blue stripes on his hat and shirt also turned to purple in this game for some reason. Maybe that's some evidence for theory crafting, maybe it's not. I'm definitely not to say. And now we're gonna move on to Fredbear. This model contains 76,958 faces and 115,858 edges. This model doesn't show too many signs of decay, however does look very creepy. Fredbear's teeth do remain sharp just like the rest of the Nightmare animatronics, however they are the only teeth that have blood on them, which is definitely a reference to the bite of 83. On top of that, even his stomach teeth have blood on them, which is pretty funny, because I don't think his stomach was the one doing the work in the bite of 83. You can also see here he has a nice fashionable purple bow, one black button and one white button. Who's to say why there's such different colors, but it is a detail that I must point out. He is missing 2.5 toes on each foot though, exposing a huge chunk of the Endo's feet. His hands are also much sharper than the other Nightmare Endos, with a bit of a curve at the end of the sharpened tip. There is a lot of detail in the skull of Fredbear and really showcases how creepy this model can be. Now, I'm not going to cover Nightmare because, to be honest, it's exactly the same model, the only difference being the color of the animatronic and the transparency, with a little bit more transparency in Nightmare's favor. But what we will cover is Nightmarion. Now, this model is significantly creepier than any of the other puppet variations and contains 18,148 faces and 27,396 edges. If we take a look at his mask and head, you can see it's a lot fatter than the puppet's usual form. Nightmarion has dead black eyes with piercing white pupils in the center, black tear tracks instead of his normal purple bluish tear tracks, and absolutely no other color added to this animatronic. Not on the cheeks, not on the lips. Unlike the puppet, this model does appear more like a tree than anything else, with his root-like arms that end up going into 3 different spiked tips at the end, and significant vine-like properties on his legs that taper off into nothingness as it reaches the bottom. You can also see this Nightmarion has exposed rib cages, which is a little strange. I mean, they don't seem to be animatronic at all. Could this mean that Nightmarion is actually a living vessel? Probably not, but it is interesting to see that these ribs do not have any signs of decay on them and don't seem at all to look like animatronic parts. Other than that though, that's all the animatronic models from FNAF 4. Thank you guys for watching, and if you like this video, then you're definitely gonna like the FNAF 1, 2, and 3 model reviews. So if you're interested in those, you can click one of these bad boys right here. Other than that, that's all I got for you today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.